Welcome everyone to another episode of Deep Tech Marketing Interviews. Today our guest is Farhan Chaudhery, who is the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Snowflake. Me and Farhan get to talk about some incredible work that he's been doing there, understanding a little bit about the Indian developer market, and also thinking about how Snowflake approaches product marketing. Enjoy.
Oliver, thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation today.
I'm super excited to hear about a lot of the insight you have, particularly your work at Snowflake. It'd be wonderful for everybody to, before we begin, just understand a little bit of a background about who you are, how you came to start working at Snowflake, and a little bit more about what your role involves at the moment as well.
Right, thank you. So once again, hello everyone. My name is Farhan Chaudhery. I currently am the evangelist for Snowflake in India. And here, my work involves around a lot of things. Help shape the go-to-market for India. So I work specifically for the India region. I collaborate very closely with our partners in APJ and the global team. But one of the primary work that I do involves contextualizing the technology messaging and our go-to-market strategy for India in particular. So a lot of my work involves that regionalization, contextualization for the Indian audience, because as you know, and if you would have been following India over the past few years, or if you know anything about the technology community in India, is that almost everyone is a technologist. All the way from a practitioner to a C-suite executive, they can all talk technology. So you have to sort of ensure that any messaging, any collateral or anything from that arena that comes out is speaking to that persona. It's a persona-driven audience, but also very technology-oriented in nature. And I landed up here at Snowflake after my stint at Gartner, where I was an analyst with the artificial intelligence team. And a lot of my work involved working with Fortune 500s and large corporations and startups and government entities, and advising them on their, as we call them, mission critical priorities around artificial intelligence. So a lot of my work in Gartner fueled my decision to join Snowflake. And prior to that, I was a practitioner. I was a data scientist in the past. I had my own team of data scientists. So in one way or the other, you could say, been there, done that, and now advising clients on their technology priorities. That was a long answer to your very short question.
No, it's a good answer. I think we see this common pattern where technology practitioners make that leap into first analysis and then later kind of marketing roles. It'd be great to understand from your perspective, how has your technology background shaped your approach to product marketing with the audience that you have in India?
Right, that's an interesting question, particularly because we are going to be talking India. As I said earlier, almost everyone that I speak to is a practitioner. They can all talk technology, and in order to talk technology, and this is something that I'm a firm believer, you cannot sell technology all the time, or at least you cannot market it all the time. It has to solve for a problem. It has to solve for a business problem with very real outcomes associated with it. So you see a problem and you define an outcome, that is the product marketing side of it. And then, of course, your messaging revolves around that, your content revolves around that. But that middle piece, the how-to piece, is really important, which is where I feel my background in technology sort of helps shape that message, particularly for a technology-savvy Indian audience. So I'd say that in particular has really helped me in my role as a product marketer.
No, it's a good answer. I think one of the things I'm keen to understand specifically with your work at Snowflake, obviously Snowflake are a huge organization and increasingly working in a more crowded market. And so you're trying to reach out to developers and sell Snowflake as a solution to them in this in this world where ultimately there's this huge crowded market. There are a lot of incumbents. How do you approach that, and how's that different to I guess, early stage marketing at a startup?
Right. At Snowflake, I feel I think I'm fortunate enough to have room for a lot of experimentation.
Yeah.
And really get that platform to experiment with the ideas that we have, to engage with the audience that we have. Again, so if we talk personas, right? So we talk all the way from decision makers to decision influencers, and in the world of data, you also have practitioners. So your approach to product marketing is not monolithic in nature. You're not just doing one thing. You are doing one thing differently for different kinds of audiences. So the message that you'd have for a decision maker would be slightly different to what you'd have for a practitioner. Of course, the message remains the same. It has to be contextualized. So instead of me talking that, hey, for a C-suite audience that wants to see outcomes first, a practitioner audience wants to see the how-to first. They are also interested. Everyone is interested in outcomes. Let's be very clear on that. Everyone is interested in outcomes. It's just how you approach telling that story. Now, we have over the past year or so, the time that I've been here at Snowflake, one thing that we have sort of doubled down on is our focus on practitioners.
Okay.
And when we say practitioners, it's all kinds of audiences, because even at our flagship events, the ones that we do for more of a decision maker, decision influencer type of an audience, you would still get a good percentage of individuals who would want to know the how-to aspects. They love seeing the outcomes. They love seeing what problems have we solved, but what they're more interested in is the how-to aspect. So I think that is absolutely key, and that is something that we have been doubling down on.
So just to clarify, is that something you see amongst decision makers, or effectively the practitioners, or both?
It's both.
Yeah. Okay.
So even your decision makers would want to know how it works. Of course, they have their engineering muscle, and with all their technical arms and ammunitions, they will be fully loaded with questions, which is a good thing. But they themselves would have questions. They're very involved in the technology aspect of the buying process. If they're a decision maker, it's a technology solution that we're talking about. They're very involved in the technology piece of it as well. So it's both.
Okay. How does that translate into your content marketing strategy when you're thinking about what content you create for all of those different types of personas within an organization?
Right. So we tend to usually break it down into two elements. One being more executive focused, which is focusing more on outcomes and solutions and use cases, and really just instead of telling them, showing them what were the real outcomes like for their peers, for their competitors, and what have you. But that's the executive level of content. So that the same content gets translated into a technical content. So hey, we've talked about this, we've talked about this problem, this outcome. Here's the solution. This is how we did it. These were the best practices that we employed, or this was their as-is architecture, their as-is situation, and this is how we came in, and this is how we solved for it, and this is how you see we simplified their architecture. So a lot of focus is again on the technical aspects of the same business problem and outcomes that we were communicating, but the message sort of it's at a flip of a coin. So you one side you have a business executive audience, and on the other you have technical, and you have to sort of make sure whatever story you are communicating deals with both.
You
of those
do both sides, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do you ever find that you have to prioritize one audience over another audience in regards to, it might be budget constraints, it might be resource constraints? Do you ever find that dilemma of which audience am I ultimately going to serve? Am I going to serve the executive side over here or the practitioners over here?
I would once again bring this down to the Indian example, right?
Yeah.
As I said, almost everyone is a practitioner. So
practitioners
are so it's always a given. But we also want to ensure that we are not boiling the ocean right at the first touch point, right? So if you get 30 minutes, if you get 10 minutes of engagement with somebody, you cannot do deep dives of architectures and show, hey, this is what we did, and this is how we simplified, this is what got maybe replaced, this is what maybe got augmented. But you cannot have that conversation in 10 minutes. So for us, it's all about maintaining that level of balance, because whomever we interact with, be it again a business audience or a very technology driven persona, they are both interested in what Snowflake can do for them. And for us, it's more of a balancing act than prioritizing one over the other.
Okay. What kind of content types do you find works best with each of those audiences? Are they the same kinds of content, example being like blogs and articles, documentation? How do you view the different content types you have available, and what's most effective in reaching those audiences?
So for a business audience, more executive in nature, the likes of one pages or blog posts or short form content, again, this is an audience that doesn't necessarily have a lot of time at its hand, but would still want to know about technology. So ensuring that we send the right message that strikes the chord, so that we are able to engage in that conversation again. So we want to keep that conversation going. And in order to do that, we want to put our best foot forward. So for that decision maker sort of an audience, it's mostly the likes of a one pager or a testimonial, really hard hitting anecdotes, examples, stories, because stories communicate best. Those are the primary channels that we'd use for a business kind of an audience, and then doubling it down with a technical persona. Again, this would be more technology focused in nature. So you could think of webinars, you could think of hands-on labs, virtual in-person workshops. You could think of upskilling initiatives, all of that for the practitioner audience. But this is all happening in tandem with each other. So this is both married to each other.
Yeah, you don't go fully into the webinars implementation piece without thinking about the consideration part of the marketing funnel with the executive side of things. You mentioned stories being particularly impactful there, especially in the type of content that works well amongst decision makers. Can you elaborate a little bit about how stories are impactful?
I think we just follow a very, very simple rule. For us, it's all about the problems, the outcomes, and then how did Snowflake help? And this rule of three is something we have found to be particularly useful when communicating stories to business stakeholders, because if a business stakeholder is able to resonate with the problems that I'm talking about, or sort of relates to that problem statement that we are positioning in front of them, and the outcome is also something that they feel is worthwhile, they would continue to explore the how-to aspects of it. So that's on the decision maker side, and then they would bring in their engineering teams, and then we go to the deep dives and technology walkthroughs and what have you. But once again, we have to ensure that the rule of three gets followed, and then it's a trickle-down effect. It's like a decision tree.
Okay, so you got problem, outcome, and then where Snowflake fits in, I guess, solving that specific problem. Could you give us an example of how you've employed that recently, just to bring it to life for people?
So I won't be able to name the customer, but let's talk about. So let's talk about a large food delivery platform or a restaurant, for example. Now, what's a typical problem a large scale restaurant would face, or a large scale again a restaurant would face? Okay, that's the simplest example.
Food service platform.
Yes. So this restaurant would have lots of suppliers. They would have a huge supply chain, and one of their primary KRAs would be to serve their customers in the fastest way possible. Now let's see how data can help with this, right? So you have suppliers. So think of this restaurant over here, and you have maybe 2,000 odd suppliers. you want to know the inventory they have and how far they are located from you so that you can optimize your supply chain. What you do is maybe think of employing some level of data sharing with these suppliers. So they are giving you data in a very safe and secure and governed fashion. By the way, these are the things that would resonate with the business audience to this central entity, this restaurant. And then the restaurant would be able to figure out with the use of analytics, with the use of, say, they want to create some really nice geospatial charts and interactive applications, and share it with managers or share it with somebody who is in the decision-making seat to interact with that information and in real time make those decisions as to, hey, these are the suppliers that are working best for us. These are the suppliers that have the most amount of inventory. These are the suppliers that typically run low on inventory very frequently. So maybe they are not as reliant, or we cannot rely on them as much. So you start peeling this business problem in layer by layer. So we talk safety, security, governance, we talk data sharing, we talk applications. All of this would resonate with a business audience. So typically, if I'm speaking with some other large restaurant or a big big industry with lots of suppliers in it, maybe heavy electricals or something, they would sort of resonate with this problem because suppliers, supply chain, inventory management, forecasting, applications, simulations, what if analysis, these are the kinds of things that resonate well with the business audience. So they would start applying this to their own situation. They would apply it in their own business context, and then we double down on the solution.
That's super interesting. I think what's interesting to me is that you're not approaching the benefits, advantages, and features of Snowflake in a relatively broad way. You're thinking about very specific vertical industries and then thinking about what, I guess, implicit challenges they might have. And then do you back that up with customer research and data that then helps you to identify whether they are explicit challenges? Do you want to talk a little bit about how you validate those challenges as you articulated them?
Yes, we do. So we continuously speak with our customers in all regions. We do. We seek feedback from them. We seek inputs from them. We also seek criticism from them because any technology solution is not really a silver bullet. So we want to learn from them because they are our biggest evangelists, and we would once again want to keep that feedback loop up and going. So we back it up with of course, it could be anonymized information or non-anonymized information of how we have worked it. So publicly referenceable customers who have really not just brought down, say, their maybe cost is something that they're very worried about, or maybe governance is something that they're worried about. How we have alleviated those concerns in the simplest and the quickest way possible without really impacting the business continuity. So once we have all of those pieces together, so if I'm here as Farhan selling Snowflake to you, Oliver, what you'd want to know is this, and you're a decision maker sort of an audience. What you'd want to know is how can I quickly go from my as-is state to my perceived future state, which looks absolutely wonderful, without impacting or without really having a big impact on my current operations, yet adhere to the principles of simplicity, flexibility, and openness. And all at the same time, I want to be very safe and governed. So how do I do all of that? So this is the conversation that you're having in the back of your mind, and this is how we back it up. We tell our customers that, hey, there are customers who've done this. They've seen value in it. They have alleviated concerns without really having to give up a lot of resources on their time or their money or administrative or people resources. So those benefits are they strike a chord with the audience.
Well, I can imagine so, because they're so specific to those types of audiences. I guess one question I have, which would be interesting to think about, is how granular do your personas become when you're thinking about what types of organizations you want to sell into? Does that make sense as a question? So are you thinking about personas at the level of I'm a developer working at a vehicle manufacturing organization, or do you go even more granular than that? It'd be great to understand what your approach is.
So one of the approaches that has worked for us, and you'll find this information online as well, that we have a very sharp industry focus. So we want to solve for problems that are very industry specific in nature, and then in those industries identify those personas as granular as we can get. So all the way from the likes of a database administrator who is just there, in front of his computer handling maybe the utilization of a compute cluster, all the way to a decision maker that now wants to present this to their board of directors saying that, hey, these are the outcomes. So that entire spectrum is something that we always aim to cover with all of our industry specific cuts. So industry specificity along with that granularity in personas is something that we've always strived for.
Yeah. How do you ascertain which industries you want to understand more about that you think would be potentially your ideal clients versus, because on one level you could just say we're going to sell to all industries, but that's not a great way of prioritizing your time and your resources and capabilities. Right. So how do you approach the prioritization of those different personas and industry types?
Right. So I'll tell you an example of India itself, right? Because when we talk India, there are certain industries that have really taken the charge of technology adoption. So for us, it's the conversations that we have in the field. We see, so it's a pattern that keeps on repeating itself.
Okay.
Now, it would be very unwise to say that we would target all industries all at the same time and all personas. It would require an army. It would require an army of armies to make that happen. So what we do is we just prioritize the ones that we feel would adopt the technology faster, that have the kind of resources in terms of their vision. So their vision has to be aligned. What we have to offer sort of also resonates with them. And then there has to be there has to be an enablement of a low-hanging fruit. To us, almost every business problem or every use case can be sort of categorized into 4 segments. So that would be a low-hanging fruit. There could be a no-brainer. There could be a moonshot use case, or there could be simply a no-go. So let me explain what I mean. So low-hanging fruit is something which is very high in feasibility. You can really get it up and running, and the business value or the value that it would generate for the business is pretty decent. I wouldn't call it out of the blue substantial and mind-boggling. It could very well so happen, but these are low-hanging fruits. These don't really impact your day-to-day, and you can work on them parallelly, and you can start generating something out of your investments. Now, those are the low-hanging fruits, and these are real outcomes. When I say something, these are real business outcomes that can then be poured into another use case or an initiative that becomes your no-brainers. That is really high in business value, but also high in feasibility, because now you've proven your mettle. You know how the technology works. Maybe you have done some level of data lakes, data engineering. Now you want to move into machine learning. That's the next level of progression. Maybe you've done machine learning, or you want to, and then you want to move into application building. You could do all of that. And then once you've done once you've exhausted your list of low-hanging fruits and no-brainers, is when you move to moonshots. These are typically complicated use cases. But again, these have very high business value. So once you've proven that you could do all of the operational stuff, once you've proven to
the table stakes, all of the
So you've proven what you can do with the technology. Now you're stretching its limits. Now you're really challenging yourself and us to what you can do with this technology. I mean, really unlocking some exceptional use cases. So that's the evolution, the pathway of evolution that we've seen with clients. And I don't see a lot of clients that would voluntarily do a no-go use case, which is low in feasibility, low in impact, because this is where we have seen these examples. We have more than 8,500 global customers. We have seen this. So we advise our clients, we work with them to use the platform to its fullest potential and then solve for problems, because we are all here to solve problems.
I guess on one level you're a product marketing manager, on another level you're a salesperson, effectively joining the dots between what somebody's talking about, what they really care about, and what you have available to sell. I'm interested in exploring more around the moonshot concept. I was wondering if you could create a bit more color around that idea by giving us an example of a recent moonshot you articulated, and you obviously remove all the customer names and details that might help us identify who you're talking about. But I'd be interested to see what that looks like in practice.
Right. So let's talk moonshot use case. When we say moonshot, it's again with the orchestration of workloads that we do. It's simple in nature, but to somebody who's hearing it for the first time, this might sound like overwhelmingly complicated.
Yeah.
Now you've exhausted. So once again, let's go back to the basics. Now you have a single source of truth. You have all of your data in one place.
Yeah.
It's all working seamlessly. You now have predictive analytics, machine learning built on top of it. Maybe now you want to explore generative AI. I mean, we are talking technology. It would be an absolute disservice to this conversation not talk generative AI. Maybe you want to explore generative AI, and you want the openness and flexibility, the option of openness and flexibility with yourself, but you also want to keep your data secure. So one of the ways that we've seen this work is instead of taking the data to the models, we bring model to the data, which essentially is happening all inside that secured perimeter of Snowflake. And now maybe you have a favorite model on Hugging Face that you'd want to download and just make it work on your data. So all of this openness works on your data, but in a very secured fashion. And now you're actually, what you're able to do is leverage that flexibility and then make this model train on your data and start getting outcomes from it. But those outcomes aren't as actionable in nature if it is sitting on somebody's computer. So if I showed a business stakeholder a bunch of lines of code, even I wouldn't get it at this point. I don't think a lot of business stakeholders would get it. But what they want is to interact with that information, interact with that model, with that data, but in an abstracted fashion, which is where applications come in. Now, to your question, how have we stitched all of this together? Sort of thought of some opportunities for our customers. Now, you have an application. Maybe you have some data as well. Maybe you have applications, you have services, you have data. Now, typically, all of this data, all of those outcomes are being consumed internally. Now, what if I would tell you that you can take some of this data, whatever you're comfortable with, your applications, some services maybe, and monetize this? So you take that application. So think of it as a Play Store. You take that application and in a very secure way, you share it with your peer network, you share it with external organizations that would really benefit from this application that you've created. Now, that's a commoditized application that is working for that industry, for that particular problem statement, and you are generating a new revenue stream out of your data, out of the work that you've done. So all the way from the inception of data.
It's an infrastructure play. It's helping improve efficiencies, and suddenly now you translated this into it's a new source of revenue for your business. I guess one interesting meta question I have, especially when you're talking about the concepts of moonshots, is how much of the moonshot is already conceived by stakeholders or business owners, and how much of it is something that you're putting together as a puzzle that you're then bringing to the table as an opportunity for them to lean into.
Right. So we work on both of those elements, right? When we talk moonshot use cases, again, it's simple because all of this is working in a straight line. I always find it very linear. And I also call it very cradle to cradle oriented. So I would rather call this cradle to cradle than end to end, because this is creating opportunity out of opportunities. So we'd work with our customers, we'd work with them who've already, and these are mature customers, so they know the vision, they know how the platform works, they know the workloads, and they want to stitch something unique. So for them, moonshots once again become more of a no-brainer than a moonshot, because with all of the orchestration that is happening, with lots of automation built, it becomes easy to do. However, having said that, we also actively create cookbooks. As to what else is possible, what's that art of possible looking like for an industry, maybe in the CPG space, or an e-commerce space, or healthcare and life sciences, or maybe banking and financial industry. What does that pushing the envelope of technology look like for these customers, and what is it that they can sort of think of as their North Star, that hey, while I'm doing a lot of maybe my machine learning, predictive analytics, but this is where I'd want to be. So creating and essentially creating that roadmap for customers is what we do. And this is not anecdotal in nature. This is all real world examples. Somebody has done this. We have brainstormed on these solutions together, and now we have sort of created this roadmap, which we very much be willing to customize and work with you, contextualize it for you, and then create that Northern Star. And then work towards it.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, I've thought about it in similar ways before. So one of the analogies that I use is Lego. So Lego don't just sell blocks on their own; they sell packs, and they sell very specific schematics and guides for building specific things. Like I can go and build a Lego Death Star, or I can go and build the Millennium Falcon, and those guides show you how you can effectively get your desired outcome from effectively building blocks. And it sounds like your cookbooks are effectively doing the same things. For specific industries, you've created guides and projects that people can deploy. And it sounds like there's precursors and requirements in regards to what their technical and data infrastructure and architecture looks like to facilitate that. But principally, if you have this in place, you can now go and build X, Y, Z. That's super interesting. What forms do your cookbooks take at the moment? So how do you express those to your clients? How do they know they exist? How can they interact with them?
So in terms of these cookbooks, almost everyone at Snowflake knows that there are such industry specific, and again, this is public information. So we have industry specific, and this information is right out there. I mean, I'd say it would, at this point, it would just come to us naturally. But in its I'd say the digital form, this would take a form of a presentation, or a white paper, or maybe even a discussion, just showing that demo piece. With our engineering team, we have professional services. They all do showcase these capabilities and that art of the possible. So it's not just telling you what it can do, but it's also showing you what the platform is capable of doing.
Yeah, it sounds like there's lots of different ways in which those recipes in the cookbooks manifest themselves, like you said, like white papers, or even informal discussions where the internal teams understand what the breadth of use cases are and they can pull them out of their pockets. Is that formalized internally within Snowflake, so all of your team have these recipes at their disposal as and when they need to deploy them?
Yes, they do. Yeah. Everyone has access to these recipes, and this also becomes a very good source of knowledge sharing. So maybe I'm just interested in knowing what's happening in the healthcare and life sciences space, even though maybe for now my focus, and hypothetically maybe my focus is not on healthcare and life sciences. I would still want to know what's happening in that space. I'd want to know what is possible. I'd want to know what I can do with the platform. And this always helps, because there could be cross-industry examples. And whenever, and it's never going to be, we are never going to be in a situation where we're just speaking to one kind of client. For example, we are not just speaking to banking and financial services. So if you're at a event or if you're at a conference, I can assure you it will never happen that you'll always have banking and financial services professionals unless it's a BFSI conference. So you'll have more mix of industries, a very healthy mix of industries. You won't have those conversations with them.
No, I mean, it's a fantastic idea. I think one of the things I think about is if you weren't working at Snowflake and you instead were working at a new deep tech startup and it was a team of just you and maybe one or two other people, how would you approach marketing and developer relations when because a lot of what you've described today are really great initiatives, but obviously they require a pretty expansive team to be able to support you in enacting that. So what advice would you give to somebody who was working at a deep tech startup, say, who has limited resources, that wants to enact and work along the guidelines that you've specified today?
Right. My top advice to anyone working in the deep tech space, but not with a big team, would be to keep it as simple as possible. So understand this. So whenever, and this has happened to me in the past as well, which is why I'm bringing this up. Imagine you are at a developer conference with some 20,000 odd people, 30,000 odd people, and that is the scale at which India developer community is. At a particular event, even if you don't try, you'll get at least 1,000 individuals, 500 individuals. Now, even if you don't go to the scale of 30,000, even if we are talking 500, those 500 individuals are motivated enough to step out of their regular work life. Or if they're a student, they're genuinely interested in technology. They're motivated, which is why they are traveling, which is something anyone else wouldn't do unless they are motivated. So the motivation is there. You need to tap into that motivation by simply providing them a very simple solution. Say they're facing a problem with I don't know. This could be a very simple problem of optimization. Maybe SQL query pruning.
Sure.
You have to communicate that story in the simplest way possible. No matter however much complicated it is, you have to make sure that whatever you're communicating in that 30 minutes or an hour is simple enough for them to grasp and then work on later. So you would want to show them how it works first and then help them work on it. So there's a bit of a hand-holding exercise that you'd want to do with the developers specifically in India. And you have to keep it very simple, very relatable. If you're speaking with a machine learning sort of a persona, data scientist persona, for them, model training, what kind of models are we talking about? Are we talking about an NLP problem or a computer vision problem?
Yeah.
You have to make it simple enough for them to say that, hey, this is making sense. Why don't I start working on it? Why don't I improve it? Because they will improve it. They will find methods of improving on it. But you have to give them that. The fodder that you give to them has to be very, very simple. You can't throw up rags and the mathematical equation of a rag or a transform model or how a foundational model works, because they're there to learn how stuff works instead of memorizing it. So if you have that sorted, I think you do very well in the tech space.
I was trying to think about the larger picture behind that, because I guess if you're working at a new startup, you have the big decision to make. Do I go big and broad with what the proposition is and what this tool is and try to appeal to as many people as possible? Or do I be very specific in terms of who I think my audience might be and go to the layer of, I'm only going to pitch this into, I don't know, database administrators who are working at large telecommunications companies? Because they're different options and they each require different amounts of resources. You can't do everything. What would your advice be there?
So one, it would definitely depend on the product that you have. Maybe it is a product for database administration. So you will inadvertently be selling to database administrator, or at least positioning all of your content towards them. But if there are multiple use cases that can be solved by a platform, you would want to think a little more broadly. You would want to collaborate. So collaboration is key in the developer ecosystem, because imagine this as a developer yourself. So
Yeah.
now let me switch gears. Now I'm a data scientist.
Yep.
I have to solve a problem. For me, the ends justify the means.
Mm.
So I would want to know what would help me in the easiest, quickest, and simplest way possible,
Yeah.
without necessarily having to go into the depths of complexity. Not that I wouldn't want to go into that level of complexity, but that is for me as a data scientist. I'm interacting with maybe a decision maker or a decision influencer or a manager.
Yeah.
For me, getting the result that the business wants is
Paramount. Yeah.
the most. Yeah, that's paramount. So that is what I do. I'd collaborate. I'd of course not boil the ocean once again. I
Yeah.
sort of going back to that same um, analogy. You don't want to boil the ocean. You want to solve for particular problems. Maybe you break it down into maybe three elements.
Yeah.
Say this is for engineers, and this is for data scientists. This is for maybe even UI UX
Mm.
designers. Um, there has to be a little something for everyone, but we have to ensure that whatever I'm positioning for a UI UX is not going to a data scientist, because
Yeah.
now what we have and now what we have is confusion, and this community remembers. This is something that we all are very cognizant of whenever we are
Yeah.
working with developers. They remember what is working for them. They remember what's not working for them, and they're very vocal about it.
Yeah.
So we have to sort of ensure that we give them the best solution possible in the simplest way possible.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Good advice. I want to
Yeah.
come back to generative AI. You mentioned it earlier on, and I'm keen to understand how it's changed the work that you do, both in terms of how you approach your customers, what they care about, and other ways. Has it been impacting your work as well?
So generative AI, I think we've had a lot of conversations on generative AI throughout the past year. We are
Yeah.
working with some of our customers on making this real.
Yeah.
When it comes to designing solutions, because they are also thinking generative AI. They want
Yeah.
to leverage this. They want to. So there is definitely um, a level of exploring the low hanging fruits first, instead
Okay.
of going for, hey, let's build LLM model trained on our data and let's do it all by ourselves. So I think particularly in India, everyone is very practical as to how they're approaching generative AI. They want to leverage these low hanging fruit opportunities first before they move on to the more complicated ones. It's not that they can't. It's just that they want to prove this technology, and this is going the
Yeah.
same way as machine learning and AI did 4 years back.
Yeah.
We used to have these same conversations. How do I make sure that I'm getting the good and the right kind of buy-in with my executives? How do I make sure the trust is taken care of? How do I make sure that I'm not exposing myself to risks within the organizations externally? How do I make sure that this is adopted? So on that adoption level, I feel is doing pretty good, because a lot of non-technical personas are now able to interact
Yeah.
with information and get some real insights out of the data. Maybe not everyone is a SQL guru.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of us just want to write, just simple English commands and get our answers. So I think there are customers who are doing this right now. They're experimenting, and we are enabling it for them. But we are also making sure that if there are more complicated use cases that they would want to leverage, if they want, maybe they have heaps and heaps of unstructured data, telephone calls data in different languages and such. How do I make it very simple?
Normalizing,
How do I
structuring your
make it?
data, cleaning up data. I mean, I'm using
Yeah,
a lot of generative AI to clean up data on our end
yeah,
at the moment, and it's a miracle, saving a massive amount of time.
massive amount of time. So it really unlocks productivity. That's
Yeah.
it.
Is that
Yeah,
those along the lines of the low hanging fruit that you're seeing is around people leveraging
the
it
low
to
hanging fruit.
clean up their
Yeah,
data and get better insights from it?
get better insights. And then once we go from mere diagnostic use cases to maybe even going more prescriptive in nature, this is
Mm.
again something that some of our customers are experimenting with. So when it becomes prescriptive is when things become really interesting, because that's
Okay.
newly generated information. We did not think of that.
Yeah.
So along that spectrum, of exploration, doing diagnosis, doing maybe prescriptive type of use cases, I think we are doing something every year. So it is to say that uh, uh, whichever level you're on, we are sort of simplifying your entry and making this barrier to entry as low as possible. Of course, we help you solidify your data foundations. We help you leverage the machine learning and AI and the Gen AIs of the world, but then also think of opportunities with generative AI, with AI, and with your data in general, which is what we talked about before. Collaborating with data, sharing data, monetizing applications. That is really exciting for us.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure you have a lot of recipes in the background you're ready to share with clients that effectively overcome the immediate hurdles of getting the infrastructure in place, and then can advance into more significant and sophisticated work with Gen AI. But just before we close, one of the things I'm keen to understand is, if you were to give some advice to anybody looking to get involved in product marketing within a tech organization or developer relations, what would that advice be?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. My advice would be to know the tech a little bit. I know as product marketers, they're not expected to be an engineering muscle, but it helps
Yeah.
to know the technology, not necessarily be an expert on it, but know and understand the technology that you're going to you're going to be effectively taking that to the market. So whatever you say, the kind of messaging that you put forth in front of a decision maker, decision influencer, practitioner, it has to come from a place of information. It has to
Yeah.
come from a place of knowing what the technology does, because it's not just selling a product. It's not a commodity. That's
Okay.
that's what my advice is. This is whenever we talk technology, these are not commodities in nature. So you cannot sell it as a commodity. It's much different. It's solving for something. It's simplifying something else. It's creating opportunities for business. You're really solving problems. So um, going back to those fundamentals really help. And then again, knowing your audience, interact with them, establish connections, because these go a long way. These go a really long way, and give back to the community.
Yeah, that's some fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Farhan, for all of the insights you've been sharing. It's been particularly interesting from my perspective to understand how Snowflake approaches user personas, the rule of three, thinking about the recipes within the broader cookbooks of different applications. I think there's some really great nuggets of insight there for anybody working in product marketing in a tech organization, or getting started in developer relations. So thank you so much, Farhan. Have a great day, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.